Ambos me amam pra sempre. Eu vou convencer o papai, se você me ajudar, a você fazer esse teste aí de admissão para esse conservatório.
Escrevo a bordo do Liberty, partindo para a Grécia.
Taca isso! O Iorcos.
Dá um neto, seu Feliciano, que quer tanto.
Eu vou prestar a escola de Viena. Não ia dar certo não com Iorcos. Voltei! Papai, eu cometi um erro.
Que é isso?
Cadê Euridice? Eu quero falar com a minha irmã.
Está na Europa, na Áustria. Entrou na escola com que sempre sonhou. Já não és minha filha.
Eu não tenho pra onde ir. Eu não tenho pra onde ir!
Sais pelas traseiras.
Tô grávida.
O doutor falou que você não estava muito feliz com a notícia, não.
Não esquece essa tua irmã. Vai cuidar do teu filho, que precisa muito mais de ti.
Fica pensando o dia inteiro na mulher que morreu.
Qual é o problema?
Certeza que ela não embarcou pro Rio?
Se ela estivesse aqui no Rio, certamente a gente teria se encontrado, Sr. Macedo.
Você não sabe a falta que você me faz. Queria poder voltar no tempo.
Tai sveiki visi, dabar žiūrintis virtualioje erdvėje. Ir šiandien mes turime nuostabų svečią, dar nuostabesnio filmo, kurio pavadinimas Nematomas gyvenimas. Jo režisierius Karimą Aïnouzą prisijungia prie mūsų pokalbio iš Berlyno. Pokalbis vyks anglų kalba, tad aš persijungiu į ją. Karim, hello. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for accepting Q&A invitation in such an extreme circumstances. I believe this is not something that you're used to doing it every day.
No, it's very strange to be doing this, virtually, but I think it's for the better, right? So at least we can do it virtually. So that's very, very good. And I'm happy to be here as well.
So first of all, how are you and where are you now? And how are the things back and where you are now?
Listen, I'm currently in Berlin, and things here are okay. I mean, okay, given the fact that there's a pandemic, so people are quarantining, and it's been, the city has been completely shut down for at least 10 days. So it's okay. The problem is, yeah, and Mirko has just said that it's going to be like this for another 20 days. So, and I've been sort of locked up at home since the festival, the Berlin Film Festival. So it's been very strange.
And it's the same here. As you can imagine, we have to shift the whole festival to a virtual sphere. So it was a big challenge for us, but also for audiences that are used to watching films, together on the big screen. And now they somehow have to have it on their home computers and so on and so on. But I guess this is also nice that people, when they're sitting at home, they can have a quality content and beautiful films that otherwise wouldn't be screened anymore. But going back to your film, to Invisible Life of Euridike Gusmao, without knowing you as a filmmaker and without seeing the credits, I could have told that this is, this is a wonderful film made probably by a female filmmaker, because it's not that often that we see such a deep study of a female characters in male filmmakers' work. Tell us a little bit about the circumstances. How did you get into such?
Yeah, sure. No, I think it's a great question, because I think we live in a time. I mean, I'm all about a big defender of identity politics. And I think it's really has made such an impact in the way that we looked at the world and that we are in the world really in the last 20 years. But at the same time, I think it's it's a really interesting debate when something like what you talked about happens, because I think identity is something that is also a contextual issue, you know. So in my case, I think it's very interesting because I do feel much more at ease. Like when I look at my immediate surrounding and, you know, my life, really, I think I have much more intimacy and an easiness to relate to women than to men, either be queer men, straight men, whatever it is. And I think it has to do with my upbringing. I was actually, my first film was a documentary about my grandmother and her 4 aunts. I was raised in a context where really I was basically surrounded by women since I was born until probably I was a teenager, you know. And it's a world which for me is very, very familiar. I was raised by a single mother, and my household was my mother and my grandmother. So, you know, it was a very so when this story came to me, you know, when the producer sort of asked me, when he asked me to sort of read the book, and you know, he knew me very well. It's an old friend, the producer of the film, and he thought it reminds me so much of your life. So I think it is interesting because yes, I am a cis man in that way, but I think that my relationship in my upbringing with women was much more, you know, it's much easier for me to write about a woman than to be writing about, you know, a straight man, you know. Like, for example, so for that reason, I think that that played a huge role, not only in choosing the story, but also in relating to the story. So in some ways, I feel like I'm the child of Gida, you know, like I'm this kid who was brought up in between this household of actually very, very strong women. I can actually share with you the link of my first film. It's not that long. I think it's a really interesting piece related to this. But beyond that, I think that beyond my upbringing, beyond, you know, sort of my personal history, I think it's a film is not something that you do alone, you know. I think it's a collaboration. And I do think that this film, when I look at the script, you know, thinking back, before we shot and the moment that we started to pre-production and shoot the film, I was accompanied by amazing collaborators who were women. So there was a researcher that was doing a lot of research on women's rights and, you know, and the history of medicine and women in the 1950s, who was a woman. My right-hand person who was doing the casting and sort of doing the last version of the script with me was a woman. You know, there was a screenwriter who was a woman. Then the GOP was a woman. You know, so I think I would never, even though I had been raised by women and I had very familiar with, you know, female characters for that matter, I don't think if I had not been accompanied by all these women, I would never have done this film the way it's done, you know? And so, for example, I give you a very concrete example, and I always ask myself that question, you know, like, how can a man, and it's funny because I was watching Roma this weekend, you know, for the first time, and I was just asking myself, how can a man shoot a scene of a woman giving birth, you know? I mean, this is something that it's practically impossible. And I think I did it in the way that I think I did it the way I did it is because I was actually surrounded by women who were actually, you know, teaching me, sharing with me, you know, that experience. So I think it's two things, you know. In one hand, it's very familiar to me, but on the other hand, it is also how you make a film and who is with you when you're making a film, you know. So I think that makes, you know, the editor of the film was a woman. So, you know, I think that if it wasn't for that, this film certainly would not be what it is, even if I had been so familiar with female characters.
And actually, there's one woman that I really want to talk about is Helena Lobar, the DOP of the film, because I think her input is it's very sort of recognizable, but at the same time also very authentic, and she makes something very original in this film as well. Tell me, how did you decide to work with her, and what were your, I don't know, the main the key advices or the key sort of agreement in making this
Sure.
film?
Sure. I was very I was sure that I needed to have a woman behind the camera. Because of a few things, but mainly because my two main actresses, they were doing a film for the first time. It was the first time they were on a film set. I mean, the woman who plays Eurydice, she had done TV before. But so I thought I really wanted to create a space, which is a space of a gaze of a woman to another woman. You know, I think there's a magnetic field that you build there that I think it's very specific. So it was very clear to me when I started to look for a DOP that was supposed to be a woman. And then I interviewed a few people, and there was something about Hélène, and particularly the work that she had done with Alice Rovacha in Il Maraviglia that really impressed me. There was something really, you know, tender, but not sweet. You know, there was something very, very beautiful and poetic about the way that she looked at those characters in that film. So that was one thing that was very important to me. The other thing that was very important to me was somebody, you know, I'm 54 years old, and this is my first film I shot in digital, and I really wanted to have somebody along me that was also somebody who was used to shoot in analog, you know, because I think there's a routine, there is a discipline, there is a certain precision that I was looking for. Not that people that have only shot digital don't have it, but there was a generation, you know, exchange there that I think it was really, really important for me. And Hélène had that. We had a few meetings before, and we looked at, you know, at digital not as something that's just a given, but it's, you know, when you look at a film, for me, it's like looking at the ASA, you know, it's 500, 700, what is the stock? So there was a debate also in the sense of the materiality of what we're shooting. And then I was also very interested in somebody who had done, you know, I think for me, it's always about a certain exchange. And I think there's a deep understanding of character in Hélène as a human being that I think it's so important. When you make a movie, which is, you know, of course the plot is there, but the characters are so central to it. And I don't know, there was this something about, there was something about also the way that she, and this is something that I only realized when I was shooting, there was a space that she created, you know, so her crew was basically of women as well. Her first, the focus puller was a woman. And so there was something about the space that she created on the set, you know, that I think it was very beautiful. And I think, and very safe for the cast, you know, I think that was very important. But beyond that, I think that there was a real sort of understanding of the characters as well. And I think, again, it has also to do with her life. Hélène is a mother of 5 kids, you know, she is a woman who is an amazing professional. So there was something that I thought was very, very beautiful in the sense of what she could bring, not only as a professional, but as a human being, you know, to the set and to the project. And also this feeling of like never taking anything for granted. You know, for me, when I was starting to look at this film and to think about this film, it was very important, for example, that the image had a certain mystery, you know, that not everything that you saw was everything that you saw. It was very important to work with somebody that had a deep understanding of lighting, and then how can you tell a story where there's a shift in lighting and in the sort of, you know, color palette of the film throughout the film. So I think all of those things were things that we talked about before, and I really felt that she was ready to take risks. You know, it was not only about getting it right, but like experimenting, taking risks. So for example, one thing that we did, you know, in the beginning, we started to do these camera tests, and then I thought, wow, but this image is a little bit too, there is a little bit too resolution. How can you use this so there's a bit more mystery here? And then we sort of did something very technical, which is like to up the ASA of what we're doing to very high. So, you know, she was definitely ready to not take digital in a reverential way, you know, but to actually take it as something that we can play with to tell the story that we want to tell.
Yes, because I think that has a lot to do with the intensity of the image in the film, because the lushness of the image and the intensity of the sound, it's something that makes sense when we speak about this film as tropical melodrama, which I don't know whether it was you or it was the rights holders that later came to help to somehow market the film. But tell us a little bit more about your relationship with the genre, with this melodrama, which has been sort of disappeared from the screens.
Yeah, it's true. Listen, it's a genre that I've always loved. It's a genre that I think it's sort of part of my DNA. You know, when you're a teenager growing up in 1970s in Brazil, basically you kind of bound to watch 3 soap operas a day. You know, that's sort of the overload. And soap operas are melodramas, but I think they're kind of bad melodramas in the sense that they're more sort of radio novellas than they're cinema. You know, so this is something that I was growing up with. It's something that I've always dreamed of doing. You know, these sort of very arresting kind of big gestures, you know, emotional, and almost like an opera. So this is something that's been, you know, with me for years. And I think this project, I thought the material was right for this. So tropical melodrama, I mean, so for melodrama, so in the beginning to talk about Elaine and to talk about the image, I think for me it was very important to tell a story which is very, very sad, you know, with very cruel characters, you know, but in a way which is very beautiful, kind of the opposite. You know, it's like when you see somebody, when you see an actor telling you a very sad story but smiling or laughing, it's just very, very touching, you know. So for me, it was really about how to tell a story which was quite tragic in a way, but, you know, in a way that there's a lot of dignity in the way that it's told, you know. And I think the image for me was very much that, you know, the sort of lushness and the colors and the excess, you know, and the question of excess was something that was very important. And then the question of the tropical, it was funny because the film had just been done, you know, it's literally a year ago, you know, we were mixing the film and we sort of color grading. And I really wanted to have something that sort of captured, you know, when you're giving birth to a film, there's something that you have to give clues to the people that are going to get it, you know, that are going to eat it or they're going to consume it. So the word tropical, melodrama was always there, but I was just thinking, what kind of melodrama? Because melodrama is always linked to like 1950s American Hollywood studio melodramas, you know, and, you know, of course, there's people doing different ways of interpreting, like Almodóvar is doing in a certain way, Fassbinder is doing another way. João Pedro Rodrigues, who is, for example, this American director, this Portuguese director. So for me, I was like, what is it that it's specific about this, you know? And for me, it was very important that when people watch the film, that they sort of understood and they sensed the genre, but that it was clear that this was a film that took place in a very specific context, which is 1950s Rio de Janeiro, you know? So I think when I say tropical, it's basically Rio is a city that's sort of, you know, embedded in a tropical forest. And, you know, daily life is very much a negotiation with nature, you know, and weather, you know, the climate and the humidity and the heat and the greenness. So for me, it was really how to make a genre local. You know, melodrama has been, you know, it's been done in so many different contexts. There's Egyptian melodrama, there's Mexican melodrama, so for me it was like, how can I forge a melodrama which is actually constructed in Brazil, you know, but at the same time it's not, you know, the sort of, you know, so well-known soap opera. So this was something that it didn't come from a marketing position, it really came from me trying to make the genre very specific. You know, I think we live in a time, you know, particularly, you know, with the explosion of episodic storytelling and stuff, genre has become such an important trope, you know, and I think for me, it was very important to sort of demarcate this as a local reading of a genre.
Not a question, but a comment from a local spectator. And Lorette is writing that it's a very special movie. It kept me thrilled when sisters will finally meet. Unfortunately, they didn't. It's an adaptation of a novel, which probably, I don't know, I did not read the novel, but I don't know what's the actual ending, whether it was a very exact adaptation or
No. The ending it's the opposite. I mean, the opposite. The ending is in the novel, they sort of meet halfway through the novel or 2/3 into the novel. And then from there until the end, they're actually, they sort of live next to each other. Guida marries the neighbor. So they sort of have somewhat not a life together, but a part of their life together. And when we were doing the film and I was doing the adaptation, we did try, I had 2 co-writers, you know, and we did try for about 2 years to write the end, you know, and we tried many different things where they met, you know. So there was a version that Guida went to Eurydice's house after Filomena is dead because she looked all over town and she found out where she lived, and they met and they ran away together with their kids, for example. And then there was a moment that they met and they stayed together in their house. But none of that, when I was writing, made sense to me. It always felt like I was trying to resolve something in writing that in real life was much different, you know? And I think what I was really interested in when we got to this ending that we have now, which is a meeting and not meeting, you know? For me, it was very important that the repercussions of what the father did, of what the husband did, was not something that could be resolved so easily, you know? I mean, those are things that have been imprinted in these women's life, you know, in a very deep way. So for me, it was very important at the moment, and I sort of understood why they shouldn't meet in the film, because when they met, it made what the father and the husband did not so serious, you know, like, because they, and I think it was very important for me also, you know, the other thing that there was another reason for me to do this, you know, looking at women that I know that were like 70, 80 or 90, living in Brazil in particular. Of course, it's not that different in a lot of other countries, but, you know, those women are very brave. And I think what they've been through is very, 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 it's very hard, you know, and sometimes it's just dismissed as not so hard. And I think it was very important to me to see this woman at the end who is Eurídice, you know, that despite the fact that she's very solid, you can sort of see in her face or in her gestures or in her eyes or in her aura, you know, that she's been through a lot, you know. And I think that was very important, you know, that they didn't meet. Of course, they could have met when they're 90, you know, but at the same time, for me, it was more important that, you know, no, things, we need to take this seriously. And I think that the repercussions of patriarchy are so deep that I think it's, you know, and I think that also from the standpoint of a film director, I think it was very important for me to create that frustration in the viewer. So maybe politically there will be a reaction to that. So that was also something that was in my mind when I was thinking about the ending.
Yeah, but as we already talked about the ending, I think what made this film for me even more powerful was the bridge that you built with the last sequence, which happens nowadays. There was this bridge between nowadays and the past, and makes it somehow, you know, sometimes films from the past, they can seem somehow far away, and the problems experienced there is somehow, you know, they don't belong to nowadays world. But this bridge that you made, it made this film so incredibly powerful and effective, and sort of made me think a lot about whether, I mean, is this world really disappeared? I mean, yes, to a certain level, but there's so much still left with us. But I wanted to talk about also the two great actresses that is Eurídice and Gilda. I know that they're completely non-professionals, but still you managed to, I don't know, there's probably there's input of everyone in the team, but how did you make us believe that they are so much in love when they're so little on screen together, but the whole movie is about their love, which is right there.
This is so tricky. I think this is a credit to the magic of cinema. In one hand, you know, cinema has a magic, and cinema has a magic also, not only in a generic sense, but it sort of has a magic in capturing what's not visible, you know? It's almost like this machine that can capture a smell, or that can X-ray a soul or something like that. And I'm saying this not from an esoteric standpoint, but, you know, what happened was these two actors, they are professional. They're actually theater actors. Like Gilda is a theater, she teaches theater. She's super young, but she's been performing since she's like 14 or something. Her father's a theater critic. And Carolina, she's been studying theater since she's a teenager. She comes from a very working class family in São Paulo, and she's been doing, like, you know, neighborhood theater since she's very young. And she went to drama school, and she was sort of, you know, the wunderkid in her drama school, but very young, you know, but this was the first time they actually did cinema. So I learned a lot from them as well, you know, and I learned a lot from theater. You know, what we did was basically we had a contract with them that they were hired for the film for 3 months. They could not do any other jobs for 3 months. They could not go out of continuity for 3 months, not only physical continuity, but, you know, they could not be playing another character for that time, you know. So what happened was, we started rehearsing, but not rehearsing on a classic sense, but we sort of started imagining scenes, doing exercises, spending time together 2 months before the shoot, you know. So when the shoot actually started, they only had like 5 days were in the set the same day, and then they were never again on the set, and they never saw each other again until the end of the shoot, you know. So I think there's two things that happen here. One is because they had been working together for so long, for 2 months, you know, when they started the film, there was a bond there. And that's what I mean by cinema capturing something that's not there, but it is there, you know, emotionally. So there was a bond there, because for me, the biggest challenge for this script is like, how am I going to believe that these two women are so obsessed and in love with each other, like to be looking for each other for their whole lives if they are not so together? So I only had, as you said, 15 minutes, 20 minutes to have on screen. So it was like building things. And so, you know, there was a whole other script that we kind of wrote, which was the days before the film started, you know, before the story starts. And I think they had a memory of being together. They had a memory of cooking together. They had a memory of, like, we did make them embroider together, you know. So there was this memory that I think we captured when we started shooting. And also there was this missing and this lack that we also captured, you know, from, imagine you spend 2.5 months together very intimately, and then for the last 6 weeks, you never see each other. I mean, it was forbidden for them to be on the set at the same time. And even days that we had scenes with one and scenes with the other, they were separate, you know, they were separate backstage. So it was, you know, things that we do to somehow always thinking of what's the story you want to tell, what's the character going through. And even if things are not on screen, you create a sort of a context and an environment, an ecosystem outside of this, of what you're shooting, that I think can inform what's going on. But you know, they were really great. I think that it was also the fact that they were really great theater actresses, that they could actually do these roles the way they did it.
As long as we only have half an hour for this conversation, the only hope that we have is that you might come back to Lithuania with your next film, and we will have
yes,
another Q&A. But
couldn't go this time, but let's hope that I come back with the next film and with a better world.
But tell me, because we've heard very worrying news from Brazil and about the new laws that were passed towards culture, and now there are many films that are on hold because of the topics and because of the censorship. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about whether it's is it true here, and what do you see the future in Brazilian cinema, and do you have possibility to work there again?
Thank you for asking me this question. I think it's so important to talk about what's happening in the world as well, besides the film. So, listen, it's a tragic moment in Brazilian history. I think beyond cinema, what's happening is a really tragic moment in the sense of the person who is running the country. But you know, it's not. It's very, very worrying. Even before the what's happening with the coronavirus, what has been happening is basically a wish to dismantle public financing of film production. So for the last 12 years, the reason that there are so many films being made and traveling around the world, including this film, is because of public funding. It's a system that has been put into place, and this whole neoliberal agenda of the new government is very, very, very perverse. You know, it's not like they closed the film fund, the National Film Fund. They're just making it very slow and making it almost not working, you know. So it's very hard to talk about this because there's no clear censorship, you know. We live in a world, for example, there is no military coup in Brazil, but I think the government that we have there now is worse than a military government. So the same thing with cinema. You know, there was no clear censorship, but basically what happens is if you present a project to the National Film Board, it can take up to 2 to 3 years for them to look at it. So it will basically means that a lot of the film industry is bleeding, deeply bleeding, going through a very serious moment. And what's left for us in the last year or in the years to come is basically to work for big international platforms, such as, you know, the name. So I think it's a different moment because I think it sort of keeps us working, but I think it's really going to compromise not only my generation, but the generation that's, you know, younger than me. And on my case, I do have a project that I'm set up to shoot there this year, but I'm not sure if it's going to be possible. I'm not sure if there will be funding for it. And so it's really, it's a very, very, it's a very delicate moment. It's not like because there's no money, it's just because bureaucratically, you know how these things are. And bureaucratically, they've just been slowing down every single move to sort of strangle, you know, the local voices.
This is incredibly sad to hear, but at least we know that if one person in the government would change, the situation still has a chance to turn back to what it was, right?
Yeah, and there's something that I would say very quickly, just to close this off, which is, you know, despite of it all, I think it's the year in Brazilian cinema where there is the biggest number of films made by, you know, Afro-Brazilian directors, for example, which I think it's a proof of how we're resisting. It's a proof of also how diverse this culture is, and it's a proof that people, you know, are fighting and fighting in a very beautiful way, you know. So I think when you look at what we had in terms of, you know, the amount of Black Brazilian filmmakers is very, very little, which is crazy. But when you look about what's happening in the last 2 years, through a very sort of grassroots production, it's really, really incredible what's happening. So, you know, I think when this government falls out, which I think and I hope it's going to be very soon, I think there's people really eager to tell their stories and ready for it.
Okay. So fingers crossed for a better future.
Yes. Thank you, and thank you for this, and it was really nice to meet you and to be in touch, and I hope to go to you sooner than later. All right.
Take care and stay safe.
Okay. Thank
Bye.
you. You too. Ciao, ciao.